Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Final Exams features 4 fascinating true crime cases from the files of Cyril H. Wecht, M.D., J.D., one of America's most respected forensic pathologists. Co-authored by crime writer Dawna Kaufmann, Final Exams explores both the technical and the human side of murder. From the heartbreaking case of abducted child Jessica Lunsford, held captive within shouting distance of her loved ones, to the peculiar story of a murder for hire with a most unlikely victim, Final Exams takes the reader behind the scenes. Secrets about the private lives of both predators and victims are revealed as the authors detail the events that turned rage to tragedy. Fans of CSI will appreciate how Wecht and Kaufmann share the real-life process of solving crimes with clues left with the victim. The book that we are featuring this evening is Final Exams, with my special guests, Dr. Cyril Wecht and Dawna Kaufmann. Welcome to the program, Dawna Kaufmann and Dr. Wecht.
Thank you
very much for doing this interview.
Pleasure to be with you.
Yes, thank you.
Now, before we start, I think it's fascinating the background of both of you people that got together 3 books ago. This is your 3rd collaboration. Tell us about your illustrious and very important background, Dr. Wecht, and then we'll ask for Dawna Kaufmann's background, and then we'll ask how you came to collaborate together. So if you could give us some of the important background of yourself, Dr. Wecht.
Well, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area and went to college here, medical school, first couple of years at the University of Buffalo, then finished up at Pitt Med School, internship, a couple of years residency at the University VA Hospital, then 2 years residency. I was a captain in the United States Air Force in Montgomery, Alabama at Maxwell Air Force Base Hospital. And then when I got out, I did my fellowship as a research fellow in forensic pathology and associate pathologist in the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of Maryland. I'd also gone to law school at Pitt for a couple of years while I was in my residency before the Air Force, and then I finished my 3rd year when I got out of the Air Force at the University of Maryland in the evening while I was doing my fellowship. I came back to Pittsburgh, met my wife in the Air Force, and we married that fall, and we've been here ever since. I have been working as a forensic pathologist and as a hospital pathologist. I had a private pathology laboratory for a while, and I've been doing medical legal consultations now for about 50 years for attorneys all over the country, civil and criminal cases, workers' compensation, murder, medical malpractice, wrongful death, personal injury, product liability, rape, sexual assault, drug abuse, and so on. And I've had the opportunity to work on some very interesting cases in a few foreign countries around the world, and I've testified in some foreign countries too. I have gotten involved academically over the years too, and I have adjunct or clinical professorships, 3 schools at the Duquesne University, at 2 schools at the University of Pittsburgh, and then also distinguished professor at Carleton University here in Pittsburgh. I have some adjunct or clinical professorships at medical schools in Arizona and Georgia and Nigeria. I met Dawna some years ago. She'll remember more vividly than I. I'll let her talk about that. And we became, as we are now, very good personal friends, as well as people who like to work with each other and spend a lot of time talking, mostly by phone, because we're such a great distance away. But we have developed a great rapport. So that's the story of my background here. I've lived in Pittsburgh. I have 4 wonderful little children, married, and fortunately for my wife and me, they are here in the Pittsburgh area with our 11 grandchildren. So that's my background in a nutshell. I've done a lot of writing. I have about 570 published articles, chapters in books, and about I think about 44 or so books of which I'm the editor or co-editor, author or co-author of in the professional field, and then 8 books for the general public. The last 3, as you mentioned, with Dawna Kaufmann as my co-author, and 5 previously with some other very fine writers who were my co-authors too. And we're working on another book to be published next year. But right now we're enjoying talking about Final Exams, which is a book that Dawna will talk more about and tell your listeners on how they can gain access to this ebook.
Well, thank you very much. And in your background, Dawna, how you came to collaborate with Dr. Wecht?
Well, let me just add about him. He makes everyone seem like they're standing still. He just accomplishes so much in a day, it's pathetic for the rest of us. He has personally performed 18,000 autopsies, sometimes 2-3 a day, sometimes, it is just a staggering amount. And he's consulted worldwide on another 36,000 cases. So when it comes to choosing, and by the way, he has 2 buildings named after him in his hometown of Pittsburgh, which is pretty amazing. So when it comes to choosing cases, I have that job, and I can choose from the very best, juiciest, most interesting cases from a forensic, legal, and medical point of view. Now, you ask my background, I'm a comedy writer, which you go, what?
Well.
What is that? But it's actually all research, and I have a lot of television credits as a producer and television writer on comedy series, variety shows, and at a certain point, I just said, I need something more substantial than this silliness I'm involved in. And I decided, I was going to embrace true crime, and you could say I did. Since then, I've written thousands of articles, these books, and I've worked on every high-profile case of our time that involves a high-profile homicide, kidnapping, child abuse, child murder case, kind of my specialty. And I attend the trials. I get very wrapped up in the investigations. And with Dr. Wecht, I can fill in a lot of the material after he gives me his medical and legal opinions on these cases that he has worked on, some of which I have also written independently. I fill in the backgrounds of who the people are and what their families go through and what the essence of the trial and who the individuals are. So I think we make a really good combination there.
Now, you've picked 4 stories in this particular book, and I asked you this question before in our previous interview, which just was a mess, so we rescheduled that. But I asked that question again. What was the criteria? Yes, exactly. What was the reason? What was the criteria for the picking of these 4 stories, and what did you want to demonstrate most with the telling of these 4 stories?
Well, Dr. Wecht works on both prosecution cases and defense cases, and sometimes the investigations do not go to trial, and sometimes they go to civil court, and sometimes there are retrials. I mean, there are interesting issues on all of them. So when I have to consider which are the stories I want to tell, I try to pick those that have some prosecution, some defense, some ongoing issues in a court of law, and things that just didn't make it to a jury that we are upset about. Or we're happy about. His testimony can put somebody on death row, which we have here in the States, not that we like that, or he can take somebody off death row. So the power of what he does on a day-to-day basis is just phenomenal. So these 4 cases, 2 of them are from Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh area, and where he did perform the autopsies, and 1 is from New York City, and 1 is from Florida. So we also try to have different means and motives and manners of death and causes of death and sets of circumstances. So that's how we pick them. And thank you for reading the book.
Well, thank you for providing the book for me. It was a fascinating read. Now, part of this uniqueness of this book is that as much as I am a fan of CSI and as much as I've read so many true crime books in preparation for this program and to interview authors, but I've never read the true account of what a forensic pathologist does, a medical examiner does. Your role, Dr. Wecht, you've described in this book in great detail and very, very fascinating what exactly you do in terms of that autopsy and what you can provide to authorities later in terms of crucial evidence. So if you could briefly just tell us what is it that you look for and what can you find during an autopsy that you've performed thousands and thousands of. Tell us about the procedure of the actual autopsy for us, please.
A forensic pathologist is, of course, a medical doctor, and then following the 4 or 5 years of basic pathology training in anatomic and clinical, the 2 main divisions working with tissues, surgically removed specimens, and clinical pathology, blood serology, transfusions, chemistry, bacteriology, etc. Then forensic pathology has been since 1959 a formally recognized subspecialty requiring additional training and then certification by the American Board of Pathology and national examination given to women and men who complete that training. Forensic pathologists, for the most part, work in or for coroner and medical examiners' offices. Like all medical specialties, of course, there's private work, consultations, which I do, writing and teaching and so on. But most people think of the forensic pathologist within the context of an official governmental medical legal investigative office, that is, medical examiner or coroner. And in fact, I have been coroner of Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, and surrounding communities for 20 years, 2 separate 10-year terms, 4 years before that as chief forensic pathologist, and even a year and a half before that as an assistant district attorney and medical legal advisor to the district attorney of Allegheny County. In addition to my role as coroner of Allegheny County, going back to the late 60s and continuing to the present time, so what's that? That's 45 years almost. I have been also doing the autopsies for coroners and district attorneys in several surrounding counties, which I continue to do. The last 2 such autopsies having been performed about 5 hours ago today. Dawna mentioned you might have 2 or 3. Last week I did 6 one day. Then there's some days, of course, you don't have any. That varies because, needless to say, they're not scheduled like patients schedule appointments with doctors. But I did number 355 today. I shall reach about 400, which is a lot more than any forensic pathologist, to my knowledge. I shouldn't say any, let's just say almost all. There's always some exceptions do on a full-time basis who do nothing else but work as a full-time forensic pathologist in a coroner or medical examiner's office. The National Association of Medical Examiners, the quasi-professional group recognizing and dealing with MEs and coroners, forensic pathologists, and so on, they recommend 250, maybe 300 a year. So that just gives you an idea of what I do and what I am continuing to do. Insofar as how I do it and what I do, bodies are then brought to me. We have our laboratory set up at Carlow University, where I established a teaching program for these young women. It's a Catholic, it's Catholic, it's co-ed, but I don't see many men around. It's still mostly young women. And this program has been in existence since 2002. These young ladies, they learn forensic science. They learn how to do autopsies. They just love it. Of course, that's not the end point in our eyes. and we encourage them very much to go on to medical school, to do graduate work in other fields of forensic science, health-related fields, etc. So the bodies are brought to me, mostly coroner, district attorney's cases, and then I do private autopsies for families. They may be looking for medical malpractice. They may be second autopsies in cases where someone was in charge of homicide or so on. And I have bodies that are flown to me, not every day or every week, but the bodies in the course of a year. It might be California, it might be Florida. Mostly, of course, they're driven from different places in Pennsylvania and Ohio and so on. But the bodies are brought to me. Some maybe, 5 to 10% of my total number. The bodies are brought in, and then depending upon the case, you do your photography, you collect materials. If it's a suspected, known, alleged murder, then you want to collect hair, fingernail scrapings. You collect things on the clothing. All the time these things are being photographed by state police or county detectives. Then clothing is removed, the body is further photographed, and other things are collected, again, depending upon the nature of the case. For example, if it's a fire case, you want to do swabs to make sure you're not missing anything in the way of chemical accelerants and things of that nature. Then when all of that has been finished, there are two basic incisions that are performed. One is over the top of the head from behind one ear to the other. The scalp is reflected. The top of the skull is removed by means of an electric saw, and you have access to the brain, the 12 cranial nerves, all the arteries and veins, and surrounding structures within the cranial vault. The brain is then removed and examined, except in some cases where you fix it in formalin for 2 weeks in order for it to develop a more firm consistency and permit examination in a more meticulous fashion. That's especially true if you have a brain that has been traumatized, like gunshot wounds or things of that nature. Then the second incision is a Y-shaped incision in the front of the body. You start at the anterior crest of each shoulder, and you move diagonally downward to the bottom of the sternum, the breastplate, and then a straight line continuing over the abdomen. Then you reflect the skin, subcutaneous fat, and muscles. You lay them back, and you remove the breastplate, and you have access to all the organs and tissues then in the thoracic and chest cavities and the abdominal and pelvic cavities. You look at the organs and tissues in place. You take pictures as are needed and are relevant, and then you begin to remove the organs and tissues. Before you do that, you get your specimens for toxicology: blood, bile, B-I-L-E from the gallbladder, urine, and then sometimes we'll also collect pieces of solid organs, sometimes fluid from behind the eye, vitreous, humor, and sometimes spinal fluid, because those two fluids are kind of sequestered, and they give more valid chemical results than does blood in certain cases. So the organs are taken out, they're examined, palpated, weighed, measured, and then serially sectioned to see what disease processes, abnormalities are present, etc. And depending on the case. Last week I had a double homicide-suicide. The two homicide victims were shot each, as I recall, 6 times. We had to trace each bullet from its entrance to its exit. We had to find the bullets, and when they're .22 caliber, they're just small pieces of metal. They're not easily found, even with X-rays. That's a different kind of a ball game. But you do all those things, and then you submit the specimens to toxicology laboratory. I'm not a toxicologist. I interpret the results and correlate them with my findings, but the tests are done by a toxicology lab, and then tissues are submitted for microscopic exam. And just like in a hospital, if somebody's lung cancer or gallbladder or appendix or stomach ulcer are submitted to the pathologist for examination. So is that what we do with our cases? And then the slides come back to me. I study them microscopically. Toxicology results come back to me. Criminalistics reports may come back to me from the state police crime lab with such things as ballistic studies on the weapon, the bullets, the knife, other things, the DNA, etc. All of that is then put together by the forensic pathologist, in this case me, but this forensic pathologist is the person to whom everything comes back and is then put together in structured fashion so that the cause of death and the manner of death and the mechanism of death can be officially determined and then ruled upon. So that's the way a forensic pathologist functions. And then, of course, you follow through as necessary when it's time to testify. In the cases in which I do autopsies for coroners and medical examiners, I'm going to be called, district attorneys, I'm going to be called as a witness for the prosecution. Cases that I do privately in consultation, I'm a witness for the defense. In civil cases, it might be plaintiff, it might be defense, and so on. I do coal miners' autopsies for people looking for black lung, asbestosis, mesothelioma, people who have been exposed to asbestos, and so on. So that's what a forensic pathologist does.
Thank you. Now, Dawna, let us take a look at these four stories and tell us like you had mentioned, you essentially and instinctively know a story has those elements that will appeal to a lot of people. Let's start with one of those stories, a very heart-wrenching story, and you can tell us basically the outline of the story, and then we'll get Dr. Wecht to tell us his role in this particular case. So let's start off with, I think, one of the most heart-wrenching stories I've ever read, and that being Jessica Marie Lunsford. So tell us the outline of this heart-wrenching story, Dawna.
Okay. This is one that we both worked on independently. In fact, I brought Dr. Wecht into the case. Okay. We call this chapter The Girl in the Pink Hat because there are photos that people will remember of 9-year-old Florida girl Jessica Lunsford when people were looking for her, which showed her wearing this beautiful pink hat that she got the previous week at the State Fair. Jessica was asleep in her bedroom, and her dad came home that morning and saw that she wasn't in her bed, and he lived in a trailer with his parents and Jessica and the family dog, and he woke up the parents and said, "Where is she?" And they said, "We didn't hear. We don't know. You know, the dog didn't bark. What happened?" So they looked around. They couldn't find her. And all of a sudden, it went on the news, and people began searching for Jessica. The Homosassa police, or the sheriff, decided to make him the chief suspect, which is understandable because you always investigate from the center outward. But they never went outward. Well, it turns out that she had been stolen from her bed, not by her father or grandfather, but by a predator who lived across the street in another trailer, and that guy brought her over to his trailer, which was filled with his drug-addled relatives, and raped her, and she died. And she died because he buried her alive on the property. So everyone knows that. I'm not giving away anything that people don't know, but what they're not going to know because of our unique perspective on this case is what happened inside that investigation. And it will just it will anger people to see what happened. It'll baffle them about why this wasn't investigated better. And I could see from my forensic background, I could see that there were mistakes made on this case. So I brought Dr. Wecht in and contacted an attorney and said, "Do you need some help on this to file a civil case?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I think I know the person who can help you." Dr. Wecht had just written a book with Dr. Henry Lee, famous criminalist, on proper police procedure, and they got involved, and there were plenty of places to go with that lawsuit, but the community turned against Mark Lunsford, the father, and he's kind of one of these characters that didn't ask to be thrust into this world, but once he did, he embraced it in many good ways, and he's been helpful to a lot of other missing children families. but he's also an angel with a tilted halo, which we get into, which I don't think a lot of people understand or have the info. So that it's a very interesting case with a lot of implications. The killer ended up dying before he could be executed on Florida's death row. And the whole thing about that trial, which was just sort of nerve-wracking, is also in the book. So there are just things that you won't know about even if you watch that trial, and it just gripped America like nothing I can remember in a missing child case. Well, maybe Kaylee Anthony, which we wrote about in a previous book. But it was a really heartfelt case, and boy, very emotional.
Dawna, you said that the child had been taken and raped and then died, Dawna. Do you want to give a little bit more information about the time period that elapsed? Because you mentioned about the fact that the investigation was never extended, amazingly, incredibly, ironically, just to even nearby neighbors. But so people understand that this little girl could have been saved and should have been saved and would have been saved if they had done even a basic investigation that you'd expect from a couple of freshman cops.
Absolutely. She went missing in February 2005, was not found for 3 weeks. Her body was not recovered for 3 weeks. During those early days, when he was raping her in his room, he left her with the television on, and she could see the news cameras outside their location with her dad saying, "Be strong, Jesse, hang on." She was watching that. She knew they were looking for her, but she was so scared and so mind-warped by this monster that she didn't think to leave and go outside and say, "Here I am, Dad." But had the cops brought in properly investigated with the dogs and everything else, had they knocked on that door because they knew that this guy was a predator on the sex offender list, had they really investigated, had they gone inside, they would have found her hiding in the closet. And they knocked on the door and said, "Is Jessica here?" "No." "Okay." Then went on to the next. So it was just pathetic. It was pathetic what how they investigated this case.
Yeah, we're not talking about, Dan, the fact that some brilliant detective work wasn't performed and could have been accomplished by Sherlock Holmes or my dear friend, colleague Henry Lee. We're just talking about a basic investigation. As Dawna says, sure, you start with the family, always, and then you work your way out. And how about the neighbors, like right next door and right across the street, and so on. It reminds me a little bit, it's not exactly the same, I don't want to digress, but I think of the Cleveland case with the 3 young women that were kept there for years and so on. These young girls, and of course Jessica was just a child, it's a kind of a Stockholm syndrome. They become, and then are scared to death, and so people say, how come she didn't do this? How come she didn't do that? But she would have been so easily and readily found. It's a tragedy. And then, of course, the great tragedy from a medical pathological standpoint, talk about emotional pain and suffering. This little girl was buried alive. She was not dead when she was buried. There were clear indications on the receptacle, so to speak, I'll call it that, in which she was placed to indicate that she was alive. And so this was all part of the picture that played out, and this would have been a very big feature in the civil case where you deal with what you know, Dan, of course, so well, as any conscious pain and suffering. That becomes a major, major feature. There would have been no question about who caused the girl's death, and no question about the cause of death and the manner and mechanism of death, but the conscious pain and suffering, and that would have transposed on over to the family. It's a shame that we don't have time or maybe need to go into it any further, that the civil lawsuit did not proceed and be consummated ultimately as it should have been in formal, official legal fashion.
And why it didn't is a major part of this the story that nobody knows about. So it's going to be good reading if you like that kind of case that will frustrate you and keep you up all night turning the page.
Yeah, absolutely, and a lot of us do. It's just don't know why, but we want to know the truth. So that's definitely a harsh truth that we get out of that story. No happy ending whatsoever. Another fascinating story is the Jeffrey B. Locker, a very successful and motivational speaker specializing in speaking and lecturing to insurance professionals. Tell us about Jeffrey B. Locker and Kenneth Miner. This is a fascinating case.
Well, in the book it's called The Willing Victim, and the nickname of the defendant is the Harlem Kevorkian. And this happened in 2009. There was a CBS 48 Hours program done on it which featured Dr. Wecht. He testified in that case. But we, again, go behind the scenes and give you a lot more than anyone knows about this case. And this is a 52-year-old white self-help guru, as you say, drove from his Tony house in the suburbs to Harlem, found a stranger off the street who was a drug-addicted black guy, and said, "Hey, I'll give you all my money, but I need you to help kill me." Now, I have never heard a case like this. Dr. Wecht has never, of his million and a gazillion cases, he's never had a case like this. The detectives who worked it, the reporters who talked about it, no one has ever seen a case like this. It's so unusual. And this guy is talked into it because he's sitting in the car of a guy who makes his millions by being a motivational speaker. And why does he do it? Well, because this is going to get done one way or the other. And he asks the guy to help him commit suicide so that his family can collect insurance money that he has.
13 million.
Yeah, 18 actually. 18 million of insurance. And the guy says, "Well, there's a bridge right there. Why don't you go jump off it?" And he says, "No, it has to look like murder. That's why I came to you." And it's a long story about how we get there, but there is a trial. The guy dies. There's a trial. And Dr. Wecht is not allowed to show the jury what he showed the TV audience on 48 Hours, which was a demonstration of why this really was not a homicide. The guy was convicted of homicide and given a life sentence, essentially. And just 2 weeks ago, it was overturned unanimously by a New York appellate judge, panel, and they are going to possibly give him a new trial. He does not belong in jail for the rest of his life. He does belong in jail, and he knows it, for some time, but not for the rest of his life. So, Dr. Wecht, maybe you can explain what the medical information is on that.
Yeah, just a little bit more background. This gentleman, Locker, had run into financial difficulties, and he was married with 3 children, and he made a decision that he could not deal with it emotionally, psychologically, I don't know, and he took out, and I thought it was 13, Don, this is $18 million worth of insurance. And, of course, Dan, as you know, if someone commits suicide, certainly within the first year or so, then the policies will not be honored. And by the way, let me say that the policies, most of them were not paid. Those that were paid, I think, to my knowledge, that money has been recovered by the insurance companies. So anyway, Locker goes in to Harlem. He's conned first by another guy out of quite a bit of money, I think maybe close to $10,000. The other guy winds up then not showing up on the scheduled appointment, and Miner then is the next guy who is talked into it. And he really doesn't want to kill this guy. He's supposed to get a gun, and he doesn't even get a gun. Locker says, well, there's a knife in the glove compartment, and he has Miner hold the knife, the hilt down against the steering wheel, and the blade pointed straight out from the steering wheel toward the chest of the driver. He, Miner, the soon-to-be, Locker, the soon-to-be victim, has Miner tie his hands behind his back, I think, for two reasons. One, to make it appear definitely like a homicide, and two, I believe, I'll never know this for sure, but I think it's reasonable conjecture, so that he can't, when the pain occurs with the knife going into his chest, that he won't reach out with his hands. In any event, Miner, holds the knife, and Locker then plunges his body into the knife a few times, the blade going in. And what is very interesting and very, very significant then to me as a forensic pathologist in reconstructing this, just think, if it is truly a homicide and you are being stabbed, you're going to be moving around, your body's going to be twisting and turning, and the stab wounds will be coming in from different directions, and not necessarily in widely dispersed topographical parts of your anatomy, but certainly not in a small, tight cluster. In this case, all the wounds were in a very tight cluster, clearly indicating that there was no attempt by Mr. Locker to prevent himself from being stabbed, but rather a continuing movement, a repetitive movement, rather, into the knife, thereby sustaining these wounds. Now, there is no state in America that allows someone to kill somebody to help them in a suicide, no matter how, whatever the motivation may be. Is you could be married to somebody for 60 years, and somebody is dying in extreme pain and begging you to help them kill themselves. They don't have the strength to do it, and you do it because of this love for the person that you lived with for 60 years, but that's still going to be manslaughter. And had there been a manslaughter charge, then a Miner's attorney, a very good attorney, would have accepted that, and that would have been the end of it.
Sure.
Because, by the way, we haven't mentioned this, Don and I, the detectives initially, you can imagine, and when they were told this story, they said, sure, tell me another cockamamie bunch of BS. They came to realize, I want to make it clear to your listeners, that there is no dispute as to the validity of the story, none at all. It all comes down then to the legality, the technicality. But the prosecutors, for reasons that I don't fully understand, except that I guess that's the prosecutorial bent of people who become prosecutors, that it's not good enough for them to say, okay, we understand what you did, we don't accept it, however, it wasn't the right thing to do, and you're going to go to jail on a manslaughter charge. But they proceed to convict him on second-degree murder, and I think the sentence, 40 to 60 years, which, as Dawna says, was in essence, for a middle-aged person, a lifetime sentence. So he does have the new trial that has been ordered by the appellate court in New York City. It has not yet been scheduled to my knowledge. It will be, and I have a feeling, in fact, I'm going to make a prediction. I could be wrong. I hope I will be right, not just to be right, but I hope that they will make a bargain and they'll let him plead guilty to manslaughter, and for the time already served, and which will have been served by the time this is all over, that it won't be too many years before he's out of prison. He's really not a bad guy, and to hear him speak, which you can do on that TV program, you see that this is a man who speaks really for someone who has not had formal education, quite lucidly, quite logically. He doesn't try to make excuses for himself, and he just tells it like it is and talks about what happened. Oh, by the way, this case, going back to the initial investigation, when the detectives were thinking this was a lot of cock and bull, when they went to the home to tell the now widow and her 3 teenage kids that her husband and their father died, they got about as much reaction as someone that tells you on your way home tonight, gee, I think you may have run over a squirrel. That's the kind of reaction they got from the family.
Well, it
that was a fascinating part.
Covered this. It's covered in the trial. We talk about it in the book, that the family had advanced knowledge that this was going to happen, and was putting their thumbs up on it. So this victim, at the best, was a insurance fraud. This was a scam to rip off insurance companies, and so where's the morality of that? What kind of family, when you say, hey, we're hitting the skids, we're out of money, wouldn't say, that's okay, Dad, I'll get a job, we'll help, we'll dig in and get through this. No, they're going, okay, see ya, Pops. We don't want to lose our lifestyle.
I have a question. In terms of this new trial, do you believe that your testimony and the evidence that you provided, that you weren't able to provide to the jury at the original trial, do you believe that this was part of the success in appeal for this retrial?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure because I haven't had the benefit of reading the trial court's, the appellate court's ruling. I would like to think so, not egotistically, but I would like to think that may have been a part. On the other hand, Dan, as you know, most people, including some attorneys that don't do the trial work, don't appreciate either, that when an appellate court reviews a case, if they find on a particular point that there is a basis to reverse, most often that's where they stop. You know what I mean? They don't just go on and give you a full analysis. There was some very strong legal arguments, and I think those were the principal reason why the case was overruled. But I think that the judge who was admonished, and it was her ruling, by the way, her language, her instructions to the jury that resulted in the appellate court overturning the case. And I think that there's good reason to believe that her ruling in not allowing me to demonstrate how these wounds could have been inflicted would have been an important part of it. And I think that the district attorney's office is likely to consider that. I don't mean they're going to be afraid of my testimony, but they're going to think about all the different elements that will come into play perhaps in a second trial.
Right. Now, Dawna, we have two more stories, and one of the fascinating stories involves a Canadian connection and Dr. Turner. So could you tell us about that case and later, after you've described the case, outline the case, and we could talk about Dr. Wecht's contribution or his role in that case itself.
Yes, this is the case of a 28-year-old doctor who was shot to death in a park outside of Pittsburgh. Dr. Wecht did the autopsy and figured, well, I'll be testifying on this one. It became clear really early on who did this. He had a girlfriend who was also a medical doctor and older than him, and she was a Canadian and American citizen. She fled to Canada. And while she was in Canada awaiting trial, awaiting extradition, your country put up some real blocks about getting her back. And even after we said, hey, no death penalty, okay, no, we'll take that off the table, you still kind of protected her. And not you personally, but Dr. Bagby, who was his parents actually moved to Canada to try to help get the case moving. And while she was in court, she said, "Oh, I'm pregnant," and it turned out that she was pregnant with the grandparents' only grandchild. The murdered doctor was their only child. now she gives birth to their only grandchild who looks exactly like his daddy did when he was that age. And these grandparents know that the only way they can have access to this baby is to make nice with this woman who killed their son. And at least in the hopes of getting the child, the baby when she went to jail. Well, I won't give away the ending on this, but it is something that your readers just won't believe. And Dr. Wecht obviously never had a chance to testify in this case, and would have liked to, because it was really one of those emotional cases. There is a documentary that was made about it called Dear Zachary, which will just rip your heart out. And that's how I found the case. And I saw that Dr. Wecht did the autopsy, and I said, wow, we should work on this case. So I became friends with the grandparents, and so the insight that we have on this case is a lot more than one would read in the local press or hear in the television in either Newfoundland or Pittsburgh, where the centers of the case were based. It changed some laws, and it made a difference. Again, what interests me are these parents or grandparents, sisters, brothers of victims who had nothing to do with the criminal world before, and then they become victims themselves because their loved one is taken away, and then they become advocates for justice, and they find a voice and help other people. I'm just so intrigued by that, and all of our cases have somebody there who's tilting at windmills to get justice.
Yeah, hell hath no fury like a woman wronged. And this case has another fascinating bit of forensic science of a different kind. She drove all the way, was it Iowa, Dawna? We're a Midwestern state.
Yes, Iowa.
She drove all the way in the nighttime and back again, and she would probably gotten away with it, fast round trip. But I think they traced her through her cell phone, Dawna, or through
right. They're great forensic. And you had a competent police operation going on there too, where they were, and the attorneys were just top flight all the way.
Yeah.
And also, it just on many levels, it's a very interesting case.
Yeah, I remember telling the state police, the coroner and DA at that time, I said, based upon the location, the multiple wounds, and so on, not that this is hard science, but you come to learn some things as a forensic pathologist over a period of years. You kind of get a feel for the category, the generic nature of a case. And I said that, I didn't know that it's particularly profound, but I said I'd look for somebody that knows this gentleman well. This is not a murder of an opportunistic nature, robbery, burglary, sex, or so on. This is a murder by someone that he knew and someone that had reason to dislike him immensely at that moment. And but they did a nice job in locating her. And as Dawna said, and this one we really cannot tell you, but except to say that the ending of this is something that you would find hard to believe in a work of fiction, to learn what ultimately happened with this woman and the newborn child.
Yeah, the other thing is, in a case where you find a body that's full of bullet holes, you don't always get to assume what the scenario is. But in this one, Dr. Wecht could make a pretty good idea of which wound happened first because of the distance of the wounds, because of gravel that was on part of his body. So you kind of get a sense of what this anger was, where she, shot him in the one part of his body. He fell down, hit his knees, and then she went over, shot him to the back of the head, and then kicked him. This anger of this woman who was rejected by him. That's
and
why.
This is a perfect springboard, a perfect segue into the other case, Dan, talking about how you reconstruct things and how you get a feel for the identity, not in a specific fashion, but the identity categorically of what kind of a person who would have committed this kind of crime. Tell Dan about the fourth case, then, Dawna. That's just fascinating.
Yes, this one also has a family member who is not going to give up, and thanks to her, they put someone behind bars. This happened in Blairsville, Pennsylvania, in 2006.
About
and
35 miles out of Pittsburgh.
Right, a small town that never has any kind of crime like this, but they knew how to investigate it and how to ask for help. And the victim was a dentist that everybody loved in the community, 39-year-old John Jelinek. And he was married to this, his first marriage was to this woman who was just, a knockout, a bombshell, a Jessica Rabbit type of woman that you could almost hear the dum-dum-dum theme song when she walks in the room. I mean, she was just much more than he could handle. And turns out she had a secret past that she wasn't telling him about. And this case really is like that film, the one with Kathleen Turner, Body Heat, and William Hurt, where he ends up in jail and she goes off to her next sucker. But anyway, the victim was so horribly killed, and Dr. Wecht can talk about the nature of that crime. And then it took a long time to get the justice in this case, and it took a whole new way of looking at DNA evidence, and just phenomenal. But Dr. Wecht, talk about what was done to this victim.
Well, what was done to the victim was indeed brutal. Again, a savage killing that immediately tells you when you're an experienced forensic pathologist that you're not talking about something of a chance nature. Stabbed and beaten, and then when I went to the scene and reconstructed it with the criminalist and state police, you could see where he was attempting to flee from his attacker in the living room area where he was just comfortably ensconced for the evening, reading a paper and heading for the front door. And this is a kind of a front door that has glass on each side of it, the little glass panels and so on. And you could see where the attacker then brutally pushes Dr. Jelinek's head through the glass panels, without exaggeration, almost decapitating him. The neck structures, the blood vessels, the trachea, the larynx, they were all severed right down to the vertebral column. Just a brutal, brutal killing. And that then leads into a point that Dawna said it took a long time. It sure did take a long time, not because they didn't have a darn good idea of who was involved, but let me give you the setting. This Dr. Jelinek was getting a divorce from his wife. As a matter of fact, it was going to be finalized in less than 24 hours the next day. The next day it was going to be officially finalized. His wife, in the meantime, had been his estranged wife, had been living with her new boyfriend, who happened to be a state trooper. I can tell you that the state troopers involved in this case, within 24 hours or less, they had a damn good idea of who probably was responsible for Dr. Jelinek's death. The ones who are around their station in those barracks involved in this investigation. But in any event, finally they got around to charging him. And I testified and went through all of the brutal injuries, and there was marvelous DNA testimony given by Dr. Mark Perlin, who is a colleague of mine here. He's a MD, PhD, and an outstanding DNA specialist. And he did some very, very sophisticated DNA studies that were extremely important in the case. And so all of this went in. The trial was handled quite well by a Deputy Attorney General. Was called in because of the affiliations of the different people that I've already alluded to, and the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. And by the way, and I'm sure, Dawna, you know this, that the case was appealed, and the Pennsylvania Appellate Court sustained the verdict and denied him a new trial, finding no basis for a new trial. So he'll spend the rest of his life in prison for this brutal murder. And it just leads you into a very sad, puzzled feeling that I'm sure all of us as decent human beings think of. Not that any kind of a crime is to be condoned, and not that anger, the seething nature, is to be ignored. But you can't help ask yourself, how do people of sane mind, how do they come to a point that they can't vent their anger, they can't deal with legal matters, they can't take care of problems and so on in such a way as to not kill somebody? Yelnick, and this cannot be overstated, as Dawna mentioned, really was just, you could not find a person to say one bad word. Just a hell of a nice guy, and this is all about money. All about money.
Greedy wife, and that was the problem.
Crazy. And the thing, I'll tell you this, the thing that bothers me about the case, and I've discussed this with Dawna, that wife, in my opinion, definitely should have been charged with accessory before the fact, accessory after the fact. She had nothing to do with the murder right there at the scene. But and if she knew nothing about it going in, she sure as hell knew everything about it coming out. You can bet your life on that. Why she was not charged remains a great puzzle to which I do not have an answer.
Well,
but a lot of these people, as you know, Dan, they think they're smarter than authorities. And this guy who went to jail was a forensic. He was an investigator for the state police. So he figured, well, I'll just clean my tracks. My prints are supposed to be here. I was investigating it. That's partly why it took so long. But again and again, we see people who are heroic family members and criminals who think they're smarter than the system. They're going to game the system, and it's usually greed or lust that makes them do what they do. It keeps us in business.
There's still that no accounting for you see the savagery of all of these crimes, really.
Yes.
Right.
And it's hard for me to comprehend. And as I spoke to another author, he said that the energy needed to kill like this. Again, it boggles my mind how angry someone can be to be able to do this.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yep. Well, Dawna, you want to mention how people, this is a different kind of a book because it's an e-book. Maybe if Dan will permit you to just mention that, please, in closing here.
This is, we have published this book through Planet Ann Rule, which everyone who's involved in true crime knows she is the queen of true crime with 33 best-selling books. And she recently began with her family members a planetandrule.com, which is her e-book publishing house, and we are so happy to be a part of that. They are the brainiacs of the publishing community. They're all into true crime. They do the artwork, the translation to ebook. So you can go to Planet Ann Rule and download the book. But first you need a reader. So you either do it on your laptop or your computer or on a reader. And you can Google free Kindle, Kindle, download if you don't already have a Kindle or a Nook, which is the Barnes & Noble, Kindle being the Amazon. Download that for free first. I like to download it into my laptop so I can read the books on a bigger screen than you get from a handheld device, but whatever floats your boat. And then you download the book, planetandrule.com. It goes right into that reader, and there you have it. And it's a tremendous modern way to read books and take them with you. So if you're on a plane or you're at the beach, you can take your book with you and not have to worry about it getting wet. And it's a really brilliant way to read it. So we're so happy to be part of Planet and Rule, and we thank Leslie and Debbie and Jake and Glenn. They're all geniuses, and Ann Rule, who wrote the foreword for our book. Well, I can't tell you how impressive that is to us. We're just really happy to be a part of that world.
Yes, it's very impressive to have Ann Rule's endorsement, like you say, the queen, the undisputed queen of true crime, and a very, very heartfelt and strong endorsement for both you and Dr. Wecht. Tell us just the titles of the other books that you have collaborated on together, the other two titles, please.
Okay, our first one was A Question of Murder, which was about Anna Nicole Smith and her son's death, as well as two cases in San Diego, both wildly different and crazy legal issues, and a doctor in New Orleans during Katrina who intentionally euthanized a slew of patients and got away with it. So that's the first book, and Dr. Wecht's work on that is just phenomenal. And the second book is From Crime Scene to Courtroom, and it covers 7 cases: Casey Anthony, Michael Jackson, Drew Peterson, and Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, finally answering whether he was murdered or if it was just an accidental death, and 3 other cases that you may not recognize from the names, but they are, as we always say, twisty mysteries. And these things, you'd have a hard time creating these kinds of scenarios if you were a fiction writer. But, we're lucky we have so many different cases to choose from, and so we go with the ones that will really make an audience like to turn the pages.
Yes, absolutely. It's been fantastic. And, again, for those listening, we've been talking about the book Final Exams with Dr. Cyril Wecht and Dawna Kaufmann. I want to thank you both for coming on the program and discussing this. What is in the future? What's your next project for our audience to look forward to hearing about in the near future?
Oh, we got a good one. Dr. Wecht is one of the world-famous experts on the JFK assassination, this being the 50th year since it happened. And we're writing a book called 50 Years of Lies, which kind of tells you what we think of the Warren Commission investigation. And we are going to come out with this book in the near future, and it will include everything that you're seeing. We're going to comment on everything that you're seeing up to date, because there's a lot of, in the media now, Dr. Wecht is on television shows all the time. So we'll be bringing it up to the minute and basically cleaning up all the lies that have happened over 50 years on this case. And, it's compelling. He has worked this case since shortly, after it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the most important cases in world history and certainly American history. And we look forward to reading that and then, of course, getting you back on both and discussing this very, very important and fantastic case. So I really look forward to that. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Wecht and Dawna Kaufmann, for an incredible interview and for Final Exams. And I want to wish you all the best of wish you the best of luck and hope to hear from you again soon.
We'll be in touch, and a pleasure being with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we really enjoy your website, and I would tell people to go to your website and look at the archived materials and all your other interviews, which are just wonderful. So thank you for really taking it seriously and knowing the territory.
Well, thank you very much. It's been my great pleasure. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Good night.